Today I'm going to talk about the Mediterranean diet, which has historically, for quite some time now, been identified as the one of the dietary patterns on the planet. And I wanted to show you as a reference. There we go. This is what we call a Mediterranean diet food pyramid. And this pyramid is not to be confused with the old food guide pyramid that was around before the My Plate recommendations made by the USDA for healthy eating. So the Mediterranean diet is the ultimate example of what we call a plant-based diet. So people are often confused about that, and I actually have another ZubiaLive video on what is a plant-based diet. So the Mediterranean diet, as you can see, constructs a dietary pattern starting from the bottom, encouraging more choices from the parts of the pyramid that take up more space, and getting smaller as you get to the top. So the first thing that I'd like to say about the Mediterranean diet pyramid is that you do need to superimpose your dietary preferences on top of this. So if this is the Mediterranean diet, they like things like pasta. So the healthiest versions of those would be things made with whole wheat, though that would be something that people like in Italy would not take too much. But if you are gluten-free because you have celiac disease or an intolerance, then you need to follow a gluten-free diet while you're following this diet. The other thing that I wanted to point out is that you will see that this diet doesn't completely forbid anything. It just, as the pyramid sort of gets narrower to the top, encourages less intake. So the reason why the Mediterranean diet is so healthful is that it's largely what we call an anti-inflammatory diet. And most chronic health problems are related to inflammation. So things like heart disease, diabetes, cancers, cognitive problems with your brain, all of those things are considered pro-inflammatory conditions, as are things like arthritis. The Mediterranean diet is also healthful for weight loss, as long as you're mindful of portion control. So I am going to mention a couple things at the end about the portion control piece. Hold on, I gotta get my PCOS people in here. Again, apologies for the technical difficulties if it's not transmitting. So if we look at the Mediterranean diet, my favorite thing about the Mediterranean diet is along the bottom here, you'll notice that they consider the foundation of a healthful diet, healthful lifestyle, I guess, is physical activity and also socializing with people around food. So given that here in the United States, we have a tendency towards eating dinner alone often while watching Netflix, I think that this is really an important thing to note. So sharing meals with other people is an important part of human socialization and has been since the beginning of time. So anything that we can do to increase our interface with other people when we're having meals, to have opportunities to talk and de-stress and share your events of the day, I think is important. But you'll notice the next level up on the Mediterranean diet, and this, by the way, is from the Old Ways organization. It's oldways.org, I think it is. They have tons of information about the Mediterranean diet and also other what are called traditional diets. So dietary patterns that people have been following, since the beginning of time and why they are healthful to this day. So the next level up, which is so colorful, is the fruit and vegetable, grain, and nuts and seeds and legumes level. So fruits, vegetables, grains, encouraging mostly whole grains, olive oil, beans, nuts, seeds, and legumes, so beans, and then herbs and spices. So you notice that's the largest part of this pyramid. And so that is important because that means that's where most of your dietary patterns or dietary choices should come from. And that's actually reflected in the Choose My Plate USDA food guide that currently is in use. It's also reflective of the American Institute for Cancer Research's New American Plate, which encourages more plant foods and whole grains, and also the Harvard School of Nutrition encourages that kind of eating pattern. So these things, these visuals, I always tell people, they look simple, but they have a lot of science embedded in them. So people don't eat micrograms and international equivalents, they eat whole foods. So that's what we're trying to do. So again, I'm just going to put this down for a second and talk about why fruits, vegetables, whole grains. And I've touched on this in other videos that I've done. We now believe that it's likely that the thousands of studies that tell us that eating more fruits, vegetables, whole grains, nuts, seeds, legumes is an extremely healthy dietary pattern and correlated with a low risk of pretty much every disease you can think of, is largely probably beyond the vitamins and minerals and the fiber. It's the thousands of phytonutrients that are in those foods. So phyto just means plant in Greek. Phytonutrients, it's just a big word to represent a giant category of thousands of chemicals that act as natural anti-inflammatories, natural antioxidants, and natural detoxifiers for the human body. So when you're eating a balanced plate, as I outline in my books, actually, I should mention these, the PCOS diet plan and the prediabetes diet plan are my two books that use a balanced plate to encourage healthy eating. And that is really encapsulated well in this Mediterranean food pyramid. So everybody has heard about phytonutrients. If they've ever heard that red wine is good for you, or dark chocolate is good for you, or green tea is good for you, that's all a reflection of these phytonutrients that are in those foods. And again, there are hundreds of them, who knows, maybe thousands in every food that we can't replace with supplements and pills. So when we eat a diet that is plant-based, we're eating a lot of phytonutrients. Many of these compounds that give the plant their color, their taste, their smell, the easy way to think about it is the categories are often more abundant based on the color or the pigment that gives the plant its color. So for example, tomatoes, which are very high in lycopenes, it's a potent antioxidant, but as are other things like red grapefruit that have that pigment in them. Carotenoids are found in winter squash and sweet potatoes and carrots. So that's why we have, again, these simple messages: eat according to the rainbow, eat a variety of colorful fruits and vegetables, because you'll naturally get a lot of these elements in your diet without having to stress about complex words like isocyanates and polyphenols and lycopene and etc. So if you cover most of your plate, about 3/4 of your plate, with these things that are in this category, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts, seeds, beans, then you can then move up the pyramid to select your protein sources. So the Mediterranean dietary pattern encourages seafood. So that would be fish or shellfish at least twice a week. And then some, inclusion of poultry and dairy. So they really like dairy. So that's good news for those of us who like dairy. And I mention that specifically because dairy is often demonized on many things that we read, particularly online. And to know that there's some science that as long as somebody doesn't have an intolerance or some other indication why they cannot eat these things, that including some dairy in the diet is helpful. At the very top, you can see, you may not be able to see, but I can see it, red meat and sweets. So again, they're not completely excluded, but there is a suggestion to limit red meat, and that would include processed meats. So in terms of, I know people like red meat, and who makes recommendations on how much red meat is healthy or safe to consume? Safe is kind of not the best word, so forget that. How much are we allowed to eat before it's possible that we may start to accrue some health side effects related to too much red meat? The American Institute for Cancer Research actually makes a recommendation, and they suggest that red meat, which is beef, pork, lamb, or veal, that we limit our red meat consumption to between 11 and 18 ounces a week. So their official recommendation is 18 ounces. So if you think that a 3-ounce piece of protein, about the size of a deck of cards, is 3 ounces, so about 5 of those a week. But if you're going more for like the 11 ounces, I would go for no more than 4 decks of cards of red meat weekly. And again, limit your intake of processed meats, bologna, salami, sausages, things that are smoked and cured and contain nitrites. The American Institute for Cancer Research really doesn't like those. So I would suggest limit them to occasional use, and that way they're not a big player in your diet. So I did want to mention a little bit about portion control, because if you look down here, we have all kinds of healthy foods, but it also includes oils and cheese and nuts and seeds. So for someone who is trying to lose weight, and the Mediterranean diet has been found to be a very helpful pattern for people that are trying to lose weight, it's important that you think about portion control. So this is a particularly important for me because two of my favorite foods are cheese and peanut butter. So this right here is not real peanut butter. See if you can see that. I'm going to pull it back so you can see, proportionally speaking, that is a tablespoon of peanut butter. That right there is 95 calories worth of peanut butter. So if you're like me, you could easily lick that much peanut butter off a fork multiple times a day. Then you really have to be mindful of that. On that same note, this right here is a 1/4 cup measuring cup full of walnuts. I eat walnuts every single day, but I tend to put a heaping tablespoon on my cereal or whatever, yogurt or whatever else I'm eating in the morning. But it's important to know that that 1/4 cup represents about 200 calories worth of nuts. So nuts are a really good thing to sort of sprinkle on your food or mix in your food, things like on cereal, in oatmeal, sprinkled on a salad. You know, how else do I eat nuts? The bottom line is you can actually incorporate them into recipes, but the bottom line is you do not want to be mindlessly eating nuts in front of the television, because that is a very dangerous situation if you're trying to watch your calories. And you'll notice that if you've ever logged nuts in a food log and see the calories, it's just a matter of being mindful of how much you can incorporate and still stay in a balanced thing. And yes, I see a question, is it okay to mix nuts together? Absolutely. They're all basically about the same calories per serving. So just think 1/4 cup of nuts, measure it out, see what it looks like. Different nuts have different attributes. They're all good for you. You know, for example, almonds, the highest in vitamin E, and walnuts have a lot of plant-based omega-3s, but they're all good. They all have phytonutrients, fiber, healthy fats, and protein. This right here for me is the saddest reality of all. This right here, that's an ounce of cheese. So it's important. So let me pull this back so it's kind of closer to my face. So you can see it's not that big. The reason I point this out is because I'm constantly pointing it out to people in my family, like my husband. Cheese, if eaten before a meal, can really rack up a lot of calories before you even sit down to eat. Now, the interesting thing about cheese, I loved this news when I first heard about it. Cheese is actually a fermented food. So again, I have to qualify it. If this is full fat cheese, that's about 110 calories. If it's a pot skim cheese, it may be more like 70 to 90 calories or so. But aged cheese, so the hard ones, cheddar, Gouda, Swiss cheese, you know, hard cheeses are fermented foods. They put cultures in them and they let them sit and age and become cheese. So like fermented foods like kimchi and sauerkraut, dairy that comes from yogurt, aged cheese, and kefir are probiotics, and they help to keep your gut healthy. But again, you need to be mindful of this amount of cheese. So cheese is, you know, when I eat cheese, I try to cut, aim for about an ounce, cut it up in little skinny pieces, eat it with some sort of crackers or vegetables, but not too many, because it's great protein, it's calcium. Again, if it's a hard cheese, it's a fermented food, but do be aware that what I just showed you is 110 calories worth of cheese. I think that is all I wanted to point out about the Mediterranean diet. Of course, right in the middle, a lot of people get really happy about the avocado that's in there. Just, think balance, think of the balanced plate. So again, I outline a balanced plate and how to build them in my books, the PCOS diet plan and the prediabetes diet plan. I have Facebook pages, prediabetes diet plan and PCOS diet. If you want to follow, I try to pop in pictures of things I've made that are balanced plates and offer some advice on encounters I have with my patients that my patients and I have found insightful, and studies about prediabetes, diabetes prevention, and PCOS, which is a big passion of mine. I have a question about any thoughts about raisins and apricots. They would be in this level, the plant-based level, but again, you need to be mindful because a couple tablespoons of raisins, for example, is the equivalent of eating a fistful of grapes. The thing about dried fruits is that you can consume them really quickly and overeat them. And so just, in the context, for example, of these balanced plate things that I offer to my patients in my books, Carbohydrates, you want to try to spread them out over the day and pair them with protein. So if you have some cheese and say a tablespoon of dried fruit, that's a great way to pair carbohydrates and proteins together. Fruit is nothing but good for you. Let me say this again, whole good for you. Juice you should limit, but to manage your carbohydrates and your blood sugars and your insulin levels, like I talk about in my books, spread them out one serving at a time over the day and pair them with protein where you can. So I think I'm going to wrap it up at this point. Can't remember exactly what I'm talking about next week, but it's on the ZubiaLive.com webpage. Search for my name and look for future and upcoming broadcasts. Thanks. Have a good day.